trying.
mentoring her?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. All right, Judah, we are ready to launch, my friend, when you are. Make sure that keyboard's off so we're not picking up any audio from prompts. And in public mode, too. Okay, full screen graphic is up. All right, so the full screen graphic is up. I should see this soon. I'm not seeing that on my okay, I am seeing that. All right, Lloyd Snook, guys, is going to be up here shortly. That's going to stay on for about 30 seconds, and then Lloyd, he's going to count us down when that pulls, and then we're on.
Okay.
I'm going to thank the sponsors, and then we'll have a combo.
Great.
My friend, public, okay, Judah Wickhauer's behind the board. We got someone on the stream already. Guys, if you want to join us, we're happy to chat Charlottesville and your topics. You can dictate the pace and convo. Guys, welcome to the I Love CVille show. My name is Jerry Miller. A pleasure to connect with you on a Thursday morning, a little earlier than most. I'm trying to make this show a 12:30 slot weekdays. A lot I want to cover here with Lloyd Snook, one of the prominent defense attorneys here in the city of Charlottesville and Central Virginia. We'll do that in moments. We'll welcome Lloyd to the show. First, let's thank Greenberry's Coffee. For more than 25 years, Sean and Roxanne Simmons at Greenberry's Coffee have been Charlottesville's longest-running coffee roasters. They now have 32 locations across the globe, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Japan. It's impressive. Let's welcome Lloyd Snook, guys. Lloyd Snook, thank you for joining us on the show.
Happy to be here.
A lot I want to cover. We were talking off air with Lloyd that I often go to Lloyd's Facebook page to follow news stories. He does a very good job of taking the news cycle and putting it in a way that we can understand it. And you also offer your analysis and perspective. One of the stories that I think is making its rounds right now is City Council and its hopes of raising and perhaps setting its own pay. In a very narrow vote, 3-2, 3 in favor was Walker, Bellamy, and Galvin. They said that they would like to amend the charter and potentially dictate their own pay moving forward. I'm going to start open-ended with you.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on this topic?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that under Virginia law, there's a Virginia state statute that says that city councilors get paid, in this case it's $18,000, the mayor can get $20,000, and it's dictated by the population of the city. So that's the otherwise controlling law. A city can have a charter that has to be approved by the Virginia General Assembly, and once it's approved by the General Assembly to have something different, it can deviate from that law. So, for example, Alexandria has a different pay grade. And so the proposal here is simply to ask the General Assembly to allow City Council to set its own salaries. That's what ultimately got approved. What had first been requested was a proposal that was going to tie the salary to the city manager's salary. Say get 20% of what the city manager
which was
would get.
ridiculous because council was negotiating the salary of the city manager. So if council is saying, I want 20% of that, there's nepotism, there's conflict of interest there because they can say, let's raise his salary so I can get more money.
There's certainly every incentive to not hold down the city manager's salary. And you don't want to be super chintzy with your city manager. You want to be fair to the city manager, but you also don't want to have an incentive to jack it up.
Yeah, but can I counter that point? Fair with the city manager. This guy, we're searching for a city manager. It's an open position. Previous gentleman, a compensation package well north of $200,000 when you include the health benefits and everything. $180,000 salary, awesome health benefits. Gave him a loan so he could put 20% down on his home, a interest-free loan that I think was forgiven, an MBA that was paid for at the University of Virginia. So this guy had a great compensation package. Where I'm going with this is, if the city manager is paid such mucho dinero, isn't that going to have a trickle-down effect to all the positions below him? Because we can't, Lloyd, have such a large wage gap between the top dog in the city and the number 2 person in the city. So top dog in the city's salary is going to make every other person's in the city's salary go up.
Well, and certainly that there's some truth to that. I think the first point that we need to recognize is that top city managers get paid very well, not just in Charlottesville.
$250,000 well?
Well,
that's a lot.
I mean, what happened there? I was not a part of any of the negotiations. I don't really know all the details. He started off at, I don't know, 160,000, I think it was, and there are various other provisions built in there. One of which was the loan to be forgiven. and I don't know exactly how that shook out. What was striking to me as I looked at the end result of all of this was they had decided not to renew his contract, and then he goes and takes another job in Chapel Hill, but the provisions of the severance apparently were that he would continue to get paid through today. I think is actually the last day he gets paid through, regardless of whether he was hired someplace else.
Our guest on yesterday's show, Joe Thomas of WCHV, our guest on the show called that hush money.
I'm not going to go there. I don't know, but there's a lot of stuff that happened in the last couple of years that I think a lot of folks who would say we're not terribly proud of.
Absolutely. Lloyd Snook, our guest, guys, kind enough to join us here on the I Love CVille show, thanks to Greenberry's Coffee. I think that City Council, we're at this crossroads here, and I asked this question of Joe Thomas, and Ray Cadell has something very nice to say already of you. We have a lot of people on the broadcast here. Ray Cadell says, Lloyd, I sometimes disagree philosophically with you, but you are a rocket scientist about the law in our city. P.S. Have Lloyd sing something on air. He's a great guy. Ray Cadell, thank you for joining us. Terry Thompson, Tim Morris, Sarah Helbachinsky, Meg Elizabeth Welch. I mean, we're rocking and rolling right now. Here's the question I have for you.
Yeah.
I think post A12, council and what the expectations are of our city council is very different than pre-A12. And I think post A12, this job may be turning into a full-time position.
Well, I think the folks would tell you that before August 12th, it was becoming a full-time position. There's nothing about the job that says it has to be a full-time position. And one of the interesting things to me, I mean, I was on the Planning Commission for 8 years in the 1980s. I was the chair of the Planning Commission. I know I had a good feel back then for what was involved in all aspects of the city government, including back then it was pretty clear that being on city council was a part-time job. You should reasonably expect to put in 20 hours. And that would be going to meetings and so on. But it was sort of a self-defining, self-limiting job in that respect. Recently, there are a number of things that have happened. Some of it's sort of a mission creep on the part of city council. They have taken on things that they in the past wouldn't have taken on. I heard at the meeting on Monday night, for example, they were talking about the fact that they were apparently dissatisfied with some of what was happening from the city manager's office in terms of implementation, and so they felt a greater need to get involved in things that 20 years ago they wouldn't have been involved with. And so one of the things they need to do is to make sure they get a city manager who is going to be on the same page with them in terms of what's the city manager's job, what's their job. And that's one of the things that we're talking about on Monday night was maybe we ought to get the city manager hired and figure that out before we make other decisions. And if we get a city manager who is going to be able to get the city manager's office and staff set up to do implementation stuff that apparently wasn't happening under Maurice Jones, then maybe we don't need to have a separate staff for a city council separate
clerk of the
city
council
manager.
you're talking. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the notion,
which is a very high-paid position, actually.
Very high-paid position, and what they're talking about now is not only being clerk of council, but also having a staff of policy analysts underneath the clerk of the council.
Right.
As Mike Signer said, sort of an independent, almost competing version of city government, which to me is just wrong. Yeah. I mean, the city, if you don't hire a city manager that you trust to act as your agents, you're hiring the wrong city manager. Right. So hire a city manager that you trust who will act as your agent in implementing what you want, and then work with that. And with that understanding, then I think city council can be a half-time job. I understand that the people who have been doing it recently have felt it has become a 40-hour-a-week job. But it shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm. Lloyd Snook, our guest. Hall Spencer, thank you for joining us on the broadcast. Laura Fonner, fantastic chef at Dooners on the broadcast. Julian Reeves, Marcus Wiley. Lloyd Snook is making us look good here, guys. Here's the question I have for you. A lot of folks have said, let's turn Charlottesville into kind of a ward or like a district, like each district has a council member that represents that neighborhood. Five districts in the city of Charlottesville, and have one person run and represent that district, and then perhaps the highest vote getter of the 5 districts is the mayor, or perhaps what I think it's Councilman Bellamy, I believe, is asking that the mayor position be a voted position, where it's separate from the ballot, where we're actually hand-picking the mayor. We'll start open-ended with you.
Okay.
Districts, you like the concept? Is it fair to ask one person to represent 50,000 people in the city, or should one person be representing 15,000 people in the city?
Well, first of all, keep in mind, particularly with November elections and with nominations coming in May or June.
3 spots open.
3 spots
That's
open.
a big election.
Well, what I was getting at was this. 6 months or 5 months is time enough, if you are energetic, it's time enough to knock every door. You can go door to door through the city of Charlottesville in 5 months. So it's not impossible to do that. It takes a commitment, but it's not, frankly, a larger commitment than is necessary once you're elected. That's not all by itself a problem. The issue that really comes down, that people are really concerned about, is historically we have not had representation as much from the southern side of the city, and so if we went to, say, 5 districts, we would be able to make sure that at least a couple of the councilors would always be from the southern side of the city. One problem with that is then we've got to do redistricting every 10 years. It buys us into a larger problem that maybe we're not enthusiastic about getting into. The second thing is that what we've seen, for example, in Albemarle County, is that the folks who are elected from their districts get very protective of their districts.
Exactly.
And that's not always good for the county as a whole.
No, right.
And so you get this not in my backyard kind of thing
Right.
that is much more potent, I think, with a ward or a district system than it is when everybody's elected at large.
And Lloyd, I also think if we went with the ward or district system, we would have certain demographics of people winning each time. Like if a district in Charlottesville is carved up potentially like the North Downtown Neighborhood, you're going to see potentially from that district, most likely a very affluent white person on council. What if the district is carved from, say, like the Fifeville Cherry Avenue district? You may see an African American on council. Is that a good or a bad thing? It may offer diverse representation, different backgrounds and different perspectives.
Well, and that's certainly true, and that's the advantage that's being cited. I'll tell you that statistically, historically, when you go to wards as opposed to at large, you tend to get fewer candidates in each district. You tend to have somebody, for example, if somebody says, I want to be the city councilor from this district for years and years and years and years, they are more likely to entrench themselves than if there is citywide representation. So you will see more flux, more change with the larger districts or with an at-large representation.
Councilman Bellamy made the point recently in the Daily Progress that we have a city of roughly 50,000 people and only 6 or 7 people are running for city council. He says that is a direct result of the lack of pay or compensation that council is receiving. And he makes the point that perhaps if council payment package is raised, we will see a more diverse and robust group of people running for council. Can I counter that and then get your... My counter to that, Councilman Bellamy, respectfully, is this. Mayor Walker and Councilman Bellamy, when they ran for council, Mayor Walker was a part-time position, part-time employee at the Parks and Rec. Councilman Bellamy was an Albemarle teacher with 3 young kids. So if a part-time person at Parks and Rec and an Albemarle County teacher with 3 young kids are running for council, that tells me that payment is not keeping people from running from council.
And there's some truth to that. The point that I would make is any decision that you make about compensation for council is going to exclude somebody, okay? If you say, we're going to make this a full-time job, we're going to basically let everybody know we're assuming it's a full-time job, you've got an office in City Hall, we expect you to be on the job 40 hours a week. If that's what you do and you pay people $40,000 a year, which is one of the proposals, that is below the median salary for people in Charlottesville. And so people, for me, for example...
You would not take the job. You would not do it. It wouldn't be worth your time.
There's no possible way that I could do that. and you're going to be excluding people who are in the middle of their careers. You're going to be excluding people. Basically, the only people who could do it are either people who don't currently now make $40,000, or retirees,
or independently wealthy.
Independently wealthy,
Yeah.
or people with spouses who,
or future politicians that want to pursue the political path.
Right. And so the notion of the citizen legislator kind of fades at that point.
Sure.
But that's a
Well
choice.
said.
And maybe you decide that we want to have more people from the lower income categories who are interested in the job. Maybe we decide we want to have more people in middle income and upper income in the job. Any decision you make there cuts somebody out or disadvantages somebody relatively. So it's not a value-free judgment to say we're going to choose to increase the availability or the access to people of lower incomes.
Lloyd is basically saying that if you make this a full-time job and you pay council $40,000 and you expect them to work 40 to 50 hours a week, the opportunity cost is too great to get a large, talented pool of prospective council members. And he's exactly right. If I was making that, I couldn't pay my bills. I couldn't raise my son.
Right.
It's just not going to work that way. Do you think that, I'm curious of your opinion on this, amending charters and changing directions, that scares the hell out of me, okay?
Well,
I mean, is the next step a strong mayor? I mean, if we're making changes like this, does that worry you?
Well, two things. First of all, the city attorney pointed out there are a number of things about our current charter that are outdated. The language hasn't been updated in 40 years. For example, it still talks about a councilman, whereas the city code talks about councilors, whereas the city code has been fairly consistently updated for gender neutrality, for example. The city charter hasn't been. There are other things that also pointed out on Monday night that the city charter provides for elections in May. We've now got elections in November. How did that happen? Well, it happened because the city code was changed,
Right.
but the charter hasn't been changed.
I think someone pointed out, it may have been on your Facebook page, on one of your Facebook streams, that perhaps we don't even have legitimate counselors by charter. The election didn't happen how it was supposed to go.
Yeah. I didn't talk about that, but
Right.
it was talked about Monday night.
Yeah.
And I don't know what
We don't have the answer.
I don't know
Yeah.
what I certainly think we ought to be changing the charter to reflect what we're doing.
Totally.
And some of that, if they're seen as sort of cosmetic changes, as language changes, things like that, that's fine. The notion of a strong mayor, on the other hand, is a radically different proposal.
Well, do you like...
Okay.
Let's go down that road. Do you
Okay.
like the concept?
Not.
No?
Not.
Why?
First of all, because if you're going to be a strong mayor, you've got to be a mayor with executive powers. It can't simply be, I'm the strong mayor and I am the chief legislator, because that's really nothing more than what we've got now. And let's distinguish between two things. One is strong mayor and one is separately elected mayor. A strong mayor surely would be separately elected, but you can have separately elected weak mayors, which is also kind of it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I am...
Well, that's what West Bellamy's proposing, is a separately elected weak mayor.
Right.
Is the mayor gets picked, but still has no power outside of setting the agenda and running the council meeting.
And that, to me, I mean, there's some problems.
That's ridiculous.
Well, the first problem with it is a purely practical problem, which is that it means you are now electing a mayor for 4 years, not 2. And it means that the council doesn't get to pick its own chair. The fundamental job of the mayor is to be the voice of council to the outside world. It is not to be an independent power structure.
Right.
It is to be the person who speaks for council to the outside world, who sits down, hopefully frequently, with the city manager to kind of work out what's going to happen. And it is that position of trust and being an intermediary for council that means it really needs to be council's pick. It's not the city's as a whole's pick.
He's
it's the
basically
council's
saying
pick.
it should not be forced upon council by the city of Charlottesville. It should be chosen, the mayor, by council, because this person has to be someone that's cherry-picked, that can get along with everybody, and that can be cohesive.
Right, and one of the things we've seen a number of times in recent years is somebody who's picked as mayor by council, basically because the other folks on council feel, I can trust this person. That's not going to happen necessarily when the person is separately elected, has no allegiance to any of his or her mates, and none of his or her mates have any allegiance to him or her. So I think for a lot of reasons, it's a solution in search of a problem. Now, the second question of whether the mayor should be an executive position, that scares me for one simple reason. We don't select people right now as executives. Even the President of the United States doesn't really get, nobody expects the President is going to be managing everything. I got a chief of staff and so on. So if you're going to be having a separately elected strong mayor, executive mayor, what you're really doing is guaranteeing that there is going to have to be a separately chosen staff. It was chosen by the mayor, not through the civil service process necessarily. I mean, it gets into a lot of problems that having, particularly in a city this size, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, there's a reason why the progressive movement in the 19-teens moved towards city managers and away from having so many so many political patronage jobs towards civil service. That was a change that began, I think the first one is in 1916 in Stanton. Stanton is seen as the home of the city manager movement, and that was seen as a progressive change, and it was an important change for most places like the size of Charlottesville.
Very well said. Lloyd Snook, our guest, guys. He's kind enough to join us on the I Love CVille show. Thanks to the fine folks at Greenberry's Coffee. We welcome Marina, Curtis Shaver, Ike Allen, Hawes back on the stream here. If you have questions, we're happy to take them. Post them in the chat box, in the comment box. We'll read them off here to Lloyd, and we'll get his perspective. I think, and we're talking current events here in Charlottesville. Another story that I think it's making its rounds, and we know where you stand on this, keeping the courts downtown. Selfishly, I wanted it to stay downtown because I have a lot of the skin in the game downtown, specifically here in the Macklin building, and I know taking the courts away from downtown would hurt downtown. The attorneys, you guys, my guys over at Mickey Hamlin, they like being able to walk outside their office, go across the street to the court, and then go back across the street to lunch. And it's cool. I know you do too here.
Yeah.
Why was this even a consideration? Was it strictly the Board of Supervisors, potentially Supervisor Randolph from Scottsville, using this as the leverage point to potentially drive economic growth in the county and or potentially to distance the county from the joint venture, from the revenue sharing agreement it has with the city?
Well, those are certainly two considerations. There's a third consideration that has come up from time to time, and it's the parking problem. One story that's often told, one particular member of the Board of Supervisors came down, coming to bring an elderly parent down to court, wanting to find a place to park right around the courthouse, couldn't find a place to park right around the courthouse. It was inconvenient, it was a problem, and that became one of the stumbling blocks. So what we end up with, and it's a legitimate concern, parking has been a problem downtown, particularly in the Market Street garage, which is, of course, closest to the court system.
Of course.
And there have been a few times, and I can literally count them on one hand, when during the day they have had to say, okay, no more room in the Market Street garage.
Yeah, they put the sign up.
They put the sign up.
Yeah.
And
then you go to the Water Street garage. It's no big deal, right?
Well, it is a big deal for some people.
You're talking about elderly.
Yeah, and it is not an insignificant problem, and I'm glad that the city has said, we're going to help solve that problem. And one of the ways they've helped solve it recently is they kicked a bunch of people out of the Market Street parking garage.
Really? The monthly parking passes?
Kicked them over to Water Street.
Okay.
Because they had they made a deal with the county basically to say, in the interim, we're going to dedicate more, or we're going to make more spaces available.
Right.
But the other thing, of course, what they're going to do is they're going to build a parking structure down a block away on Market Street. Yeah. And I think 90 or 100 spaces are going to be reserved for the courts for Albemarle County, and that will work, and that will help a great deal. So parking was a legitimate concern. One of the things that has been distressing is that, and certainly has distressed the county, is that they thought a number of times over the last few years, we're so close to a deal, or we have a deal basically agreed to in principle, and then something would come up to mess up the deal, and somebody would back away, and the county would perceive that the city was backing away, and the city would perceive that the county was backing away. I wasn't a part of the negotiations. I'm not going to try to throw stones. All I can say is that there have been many slips twixt cup and lip. I hope that they will get this all done and signed and implemented without similar slips.
I mean, Supervisor Randolph, to your point, Supervisor Randolph has said City Council has a long history of not keeping its promises with the county. Supervisor Randolph is petrified that the city is not going to execute specifically its promise on parking.
Well, and in fact, if you want to be trying to throw stones, the city would throw the stones going back 30, 40 years on that.
Specifically?
Specifically transportation issues, specifically the Western Bypass. That was, if you go back to the 1970s, the plan was to build the Meadow Creek Parkway and the Western Bypass. The county agreed to that and then spent the next 30 years saying no, 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 until finally they were able to beat it into submission, and they abandoned the plan, leaving the Meadow Creek Parkway the only new road being built, which is exactly what the city had said we didn't want 45 years ago. Right. So if you want to get into that, there are plenty of stones to be thrown back and forth. I don't want to throw those stones. I want to say, let's just make sure that this is going to happen. Now, Supervisor
Especially
Randolph,
you got a lot of skin in the game. I mean, you're a lawyer.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer.
He walks across the street and he owns his place down here. I mean, he's got a lot of skin in the game.
Yeah, but Supervisor Randolph is not wrong when he says, particularly in recent years, there have been other issues. I'll just use the Dewberry Hotel negotiations as an example, where there was an agreement one moment and then suddenly there wasn't an agreement when it came to the actual vote. There have been other situations like that where people have felt that the city was constantly changing its position on things, and it's like trying to hit a moving target.
Sure.
And so I don't disagree with some of what Supervisor Randolph has said, and I share his concern. I want to make sure that everybody actually implements what they've said they're going to implement.
What do you say to the folks, and welcome Corbin Snow to the program, your colleague Alex joining us on the live stream. Alex, thank you for joining us. What do you
Shouldn't you be working?
She says she's killing it for you right now, Lloyd. This is the question I have, and this is what a lot of folks in the county say. Lamoureux Square, afterthought shopping center. Okay, that's fair. Yeah. Lamoureux Square has seen better days.
Right.
There's some discussion, why not move the courts there and revitalize an area of the county that desperately needs revitalization? Your thoughts on that perspective?
Well, the first point I would make is that I suspect that if you were to look 10 or 15 years down the road, the best and highest use of that space is going to continue to be retail. So the fact that it may have a problem right now doesn't mean it's going to continue to have a problem in the future. Second thing I would say to you is that if you are trying to set up, there are a few things that have to happen with courts. One of the things that has to happen with courts is it's got to be readily accessible to all the players who use the courts. Yeah. It does no good to put something out in the boonies someplace or even in the urban ring around Charlottesville. I mean, let's face it, the difference between putting something a mile away and putting it 4 miles away is not significant. The problem is you got to go to your car, you get in the car, you go park your car, you get out of the car. It's a half an hour to do anything. Right. Whereas here, it's a matter of 3 minutes to walk from one court to another.
Sure, and I think we also take things for granted. I remember getting in a little trouble at UVA and having to go to the courts. I didn't have a car, and I had to figure out how to get there. And I was like, how am I going to make this 9:30? Right. So where I'm going with this is not everybody has our amenities, our luxuries. There's folks that may get in trouble with the law that have to rely on public transportation. So having the courts aggregated in one location next to each other, in case somebody even goes to the wrong spot, they then just have to go next door. Yeah. If you go to the wrong spot and the other one's 5 miles away, that could take you 30 minutes to get there. Right. And you may miss the case, and then you could get popped to get in trouble.
And that happens every
all the time.
day.
It happened to me the other day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it's confusing.
It's confusing, and the bailiffs all know. I mean, they can direct people to the other court in the street in their sleep, and that happens. Just to give you an example, somebody who gets arrested on the corner could be charged in the city, could be charged in the county. Right. Who knows?
Right.
It's up to in many cases, a university police officer, right. And sometimes they decide to file the case in the city and sometimes in the county, and you can go to the wrong court very easily. In fact, I've had attorneys go to the wrong court because they thought, oh, well, this thing happened on the corner, surely it's in the city. Nope, cop filed it in the county.
And if attorneys are making the mistake, the average citizen is going to make the mistake.
Right.
And Lloyd Snook, our guest on the I Love CVille show, thanks to Greenberry's Coffee. Let me throw, we'll get off the courts. I got one more question I want to do from a court standpoint here. What do you say to the folks that, say that courts can legitimately raise someone's profile? We got Judah doing his job right there. Thank you, Judah. Can raise or help stimulate an area. And where I'm going with this is Williamsburg, Virginia is where I'm from. I saw the courts move from downtown Williamsburg to James City County, to kind of like the urban, what you're saying. Nothing happened. We had a couple lawyers eat some more lunch. People aren't chilling and staying and going for steak dinners. I talked about this yesterday. I just think it's something that really was a non-issue. And the fact that this was even being Albemarle County, where I'm going with this, Lloyd, is Albemarle County, I hope, and the Board of Supervisors realize that they are only as strong as the city of Charlottesville. And when the city of Charlottesville is strong, when the downtown is strong, it'll have a trickle-over effect everywhere. When people say they want to move to Charlottesville and buy a home in Charlottesville, they don't say, I'm so excited to live in Albemarle County. They don't say that. Right. They say, I'm excited to live in Charlottesville, and then they live in Albemarle County, but enjoy Charlottesville.
And they don't perceive it the way that lawyers might perceive it, as being this distinct line. Remember, Virginia is the only state in the nation that has this screwy procedure whereby the city is not part of the county that surrounds it. Most people don't understand it that way, and most people say they're from Charlottesville, even though they technically live in Albemarle County. They don't see a problem with that. So I agree entirely.
Ray Cadell joining us here. He says, Lloyd, the bus goes to Albemarle Square. There's plenty of parking in Albemarle Square. It seems inconvenient for downtown lawyers to go to Albemarle Square, but it really isn't. I came from Virginia Beach. The courts are way out of the center of the resort area of the town center. So he has a different opinion than us. We appreciate that perspective.
He also
there.
lives close to Albemarle Square.
Well, he's an Albemarle County guy. We'll get this a little closer to you. He's an Albemarle County guy. Let's change the topic here. And where I want to go next is Fifeville, Cherry Avenue. We've talked about this a lot. I see this neighborhood essentially becoming the next Belmont. Belmont 25 years ago was very different than Belmont today. My first residence outside of the UVA bubble, I went to UVA, I stayed in Charlottesville. I lived on 14th Street after UVA. That's still the bubble. Then I went to Belmont to Little Graves. That's when I feel like I started seeing the world, if you may. It was like a 23-year-old, That was when it was still gentrifying. Now it's yuppies, young professionals, $500,000 homes. Cherry Avenue in Fifeville is about to head in that direction because of its proximity to downtown, UVA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We'll start open-ended here. Do you, as a man who has a vision, who understands the inner workings of City Hall, who's been in Charlottesville a long time and is a passionate supporter of Charlottesville, do you have any concern whatsoever that the Fifeville Cherry Avenue corridor will not maintain its authenticity and its character and its normalcy maybe in the next 5 to 10 years?
That's an interesting question for a slightly different reason than you probably intend, and that is trying to define the character of the neighborhood. Fifeville, as the original, if you look at original diagrams of what constitutes Fifeville, is an area that certainly 30 years ago was 99% black. Mm-hmm. It has been populated more and more by UVA students. It used to be populated almost entirely by people who worked at the University of Virginia Hospital, typically, the orderlies and LPNs and people who are not people of great means. Mm-hmm. They've been pushed out. The one good thing that has happened over the last 30 years is the university basically committed itself to not building new structures south of the railroad tracks. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing because when they built the hospital, people had these visions of, oh my God, we're really going to be pushing people out. But that's been happening in the marketplace anyway. So what is Cherry Avenue? Now, let me also give you one other ground of distinction. If you're Old Line Belmont, you would distinguish between Cherry Avenue and Elliott.
Sure.
And Elliott was basically the white section.
Yeah.
And Cherry Avenue was basically the black section. And even to the point where the people in, the white folks who were along Elliott were ticked off when the speed limit was raised to 35 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. And they were okay with the speed limit being higher during in the black section. So there's this definitional problem. Right now, if you look at Cherry Avenue from Buford west, that is right now pretty much all university students, staff, people like that. So the portion that is truly the
Johnson
African
Village on, you're talking.
Certainly Johnson Village. I'm talking about from Buford.
Buford, okay,
Yeah.
got it, okay.
There are some African American homes on what I'll call the west end of King Street and so on, but even that's been changing a great deal over the last decade.
That's turning into a lot of doctors.
Yeah, and so that's a gentrification problem that's very real.
Yeah, I mean, well, so what's going to happen here? I mean, here's how I look at it. Michael Guthrie I had on the show, CEO of Wheeler Realty. And I said, Michael Guthrie, and thank you for Gail Wardell Kahn and Clark Wilson III and Todd Stanley and Bobby Castine and Camryn Childress and Dan Blake for joining us on the program. You're hopping, Lloyd. Michael Guthrie, I said, Michael, you've been in real estate for a long time. You know Charlottesville real estate better than anyone. What is the hot spot for real estate in Charlottesville? You know what he told me? He said, the Orangedale Street right off Prospect Avenue. There are duplexes right now where you can buy legitimately a duplex, two sides, for like $130,000.
Right.
And he says, someone's going to go into Orangedale, buy the entire street, and then like turn it into like a suburbia, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Put single family homes there. That terrifies me. Why that terrifies me is that is essentially, and I'm not trying to be hyperbole here, but that's like a Keith Woodard, or that's like a Southern Development and a Frank Bailiff coming in there and essentially playing God and changing the dynamic of generational neighborhood.
Well, if you want to look at kind of what somebody might think is best and highest use, you come in, you buy the street up, you tear down everything that is there, and you build McMansions.
That's going to happen.
And that can happen.
Yeah.
And that's
because the person can walk to Wegmans. They're 2 minutes away from downtown.
Right.
It's an awesome spot.
Yeah. And the only reason it hasn't happened is that it hasn't happened. You look at the economics, it could happen that somebody could do that. How the city prevents that from happening, there are a couple of ways to do it. One way...
Should the city prevent it from happening? Is it the city's responsibility for doing this, or do we just say we let capitalism and entrepreneurs with vision drive the market and set the pace and tempo of where these neighborhoods are going?
Zoning rules can change, can dictate a lot. For example, can dictate the size of the building permitted on a lot. They can talk about, supposing they come in and they say, well, we just want to eliminate the lot lines or consolidate some of these lots. There's some things that they could do, but they require city permission, city councils and planning commission's permission. If city council and the planning commission were to say, no, we don't want to allow for more larger homes, single-family homes, we want to, by zoning, require smaller facilities, smaller buildings, smaller lots, they certainly have the power to do that. If you look at what's going to give us more affordable housing, and the city, I think, absolutely has the power and the duty to say, let's figure out a way to make affordable housing, or housing affordable, and preferably without the city having to put money in. I mean, trying to make houses available for $100,000 a piece.
So you're basically saying they have to twist the arm or encourage developers and their development plans to allocate affordable housing.
Well, what they need to do is to set it up in such a way that the market always has to deal with certain conditions, and one of the conditions is the state of the law. If you set up the law so that the market can work within it to accomplish your objective, then you're in the best spot because you're not trying to fight the market. The single stupidest thing you can try to do as a government is to try to hold back the market.
Right, because that's stifling your business leaders.
But
that's stifling the people that are going to drive the economy, which in turn is going to produce tax revenue to maintain the municipality.
But that doesn't mean you can't regulate how the market defines itself.
It's so frustrating to me, though, because as an entrepreneur, it goes against everything that I stand for. I've built this business in 10 years from nothing. I haven't taken anyone's money. In the first 6 months of running this business in 2008, when I launched it out of my condo that's a rental property now, you know how hard it is to close deals when you invite clients to a condo that's a bachelor-infested condo with a dog there? I mean, it was so hard. And Lloyd, the first 6 months, I had to go to the Panna Garden Buffet by my old stamp stopping grounds, Lambeth Commons, and I had no money. I would bring Ziploc bags in there for the $4.95 lunch buffet. I'd pay the $4.95, and I'd take food in my Ziploc bags to feed me for the next 2 days and my dog. And when I hear that the government is going to, in the local government, people that I see at the coffee shop may regulate entrepreneurs from pursuing a revitalization of a neighborhood or like pursuing their dreams or their past with their own money, frustrates me.
Well, what you did doesn't really impose a cost on any other person.
Good point.
What we're saying in terms of land use decisions is that there is a cost to somebody. The question is balancing the cost. The question, and for me, the real question is, can you set up a system? I mean, let's assume for the moment that we hold it to be a good thing that people of lower incomes should be able to get to live somewhere near where they work.
That's important.
And that's important, and that was what the characteristic of Fifeville used to be, and that it still is now. I mean, doctors buying, but they can walk to work. Right now, where I think I heard recently that something like 80% of the people who work in Charlottesville don't live in Charlottesville,
right.
Which is really different from the way it was 30 years ago even. And I talk to people of for example, a lot of the court-appointed clients that I represent, people who don't have a lot of money, they live out of town. Why? Because they can't afford to buy any place in town or to rent any place in town.
Right.
So the whole purpose of the affordable housing debate is to figure out a way to let people of lower income live somewhere near where they work.
Lloyd Snook, our guest, guys, and you know, we're killing. We have 12 minutes left. It's flown by. Can I take the whole 12 minutes? We're at 38. Can we go to 50?
Yeah.
Okay, he's got to go to court, so he's going to get out of here at about the 12:50 marker. James Watson, thank you for joining us on the program. If you have a question for Lloyd Snook, join us. We're talking about Fifeville and Cherry Avenue. I also want to talk about, because he was the one-time chair of the Democratic Party in Charlottesville, I want to talk history and why the Democratic Party is so strong in Charlottesville with Lloyd. Before we get off the topic of Fifeville and Cherry Avenue, my last question for you. The reason I bring this up, sir, is because I'm concerned that we may have another Vinegar Hill on our hands. And we, you know, people that follow Charlottesville closely understand that with Vinegar Hill, the African-American community was displaced, homes were destroyed, businesses were lost. It created a generational impact in the city of Charlottesville, negative generational impact. I worry that could potentially happen in Fifeville and Cherry Avenue. Now, the difference here is the African-American community, if it does happen in Fifeville and Cherry Avenue, the difference is this community would be choosing to sell their homes as opposed
rather
to the
than having
homes.
them bulldozed.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a very big difference point. Your thoughts?
Well, and in fact, we've already seen that happen in 10th and Page, 11th Street, 12th Street. You know, when I started doing politics back in the 1980s, all of that basically up to, from 14th Street all the way to the railroad tracks was entirely African American. Nowadays, 14th Street, 13th Street, 12th Street, 11th Street are largely white. 10.5 Street is about 50-50, I understand. That has changed dramatically. That's gentrification. That was not anybody bulldozing anything. That was people selling property. Now, the first thing to note is that when that happens, of course, you are now transferring some wealth to the African American families.
Short-term wealth.
Short-term wealth. Sure.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have the same feel that Vinegar Hill does, where everything was taken basically by government fiat. But it doesn't help the fact that now a formerly vibrant African American neighborhood is destroyed. What we have seen, and you know, the interesting point is you're talking about not wanting to restrain entrepreneurs. Well, if you don't restrain entrepreneurs, you destroy the neighborhood.
Right. It's so weird. It's a crossroads.
So if you preserve the neighborhood, and there's various zoning rules that can be put into place to preserve the neighborhood.
You're stifling potentially the economy.
Yeah. And that's why it's a trade-off. That's why I made the point that your particular entrepreneurial story didn't impose cost on anybody
And that
else.
was a great point by you. Yeah, you're basically saying get some freaking perspective, Jerry. It's not just about yourself.
I didn't say that.
But that's what you meant. Lloyd Snook, we have 9 minutes left with him. This guy is really challenging me to think different ways than I normally do. Chair of one time the Democratic Party here in Charlottesville. What was that experience like? I think you mentioned to me at one time you were one of the key guys that at one time was entrusted with cherry-picking potentially people to run for council to represent the party. I also want to get into why the party is so much stronger in Charlottesville than its counterpart. Because if you don't run as a Democrat in Charlottesville, you ain't winning. Bob Fenwick is a perfect example of that. Open-ended first, and then we'll get into specifics. Your thoughts, my friend?
Well, first of all, again, it started in politics in Charlottesville in 1980 when I came back from law school. And at that point, it was pretty sort of 50-50. Or maybe 52-48. I mean, it's slightly Democratic leaning, and the Democratic organization was stronger. And so starting in 1980, it became very Democratic in terms of elected office. But the numbers actually didn't change much if you look at like presidential elections and things like that. The overall numbers didn't really begin to change until into the 1990s. I think a couple of things happened. One was that a number of the Republicans, the active Republicans, moved to the county. A lot of the county leadership, a lot of the city Republican leadership moved to the county, and now there wasn't anybody kind of pushing that thing. The other piece of it is, frankly, there's the normal process that cities go through. For whatever reason, cities tend to go Democratic, even if there hasn't always been a lot of turnover, because
especially a city with a university like UVA in it.
Well, and the university, of course, has increased significantly in size by about 50%.
Higher education generally breeds Democrats.
Right, and in 1982 or so, they were telling us about 16,000 students, and now we're up around 24,000 students. And of course, there's the staff that goes along with that and everything else. So some demographic shifts. Overall political winds have shifted, but also folks have, a lot of the good, strong Republicans moved out of town.
You're a Democrat. So this may be a tough question for you to answer here, because you like a strong Democratic Party. Is it good for the city of Charlottesville that we only have essentially one party?
Well,
is it better for Charlottesville to have a legitimate two-party system? Because we don't have it here.
Yeah. The first thing I would point out is, if anybody thinks the Democratic Party is monolithic, if anybody thinks that we agree with one another, you're wrong.
Right. Well, no party does.
Well,
but you vote together.
Let's look at what happens in city council elections. I mean, the first point to make is Nikiah Walker did not run as a Democrat.
Right.
She won election. There is effective.
That was an anomaly.
It sure is.
It's not the normalcy.
That's right. And the one thing that's clear is that somebody who is particularly conservative isn't going to be able to get anywhere right now.
The last one was Schilling, right?
Yeah.
Last Republican on council.
And
he said it was a cacophony of lucky things to happen that put him in office.
There was from the Democratic Party side of things, and I was the chair at the time. In 2001, when I became the chair, the Democratic Party was split. It was split between two factions. The first faction, who I'll call the old line establishment Democrats, and the second was a group of protesters who were particularly, I shouldn't demean them in that way, they disagreed mainly over the Meadow Creek Parkway. Mm-hmm. And that became the ground of separation. And these two groups of folks didn't like each other at all. And so we wound up nominating in 2002 Blake Caravati from the old line group, and then Alexandria Searles from the new part. And they didn't like each other either. I remember, just to give you an example, I was sort of the campaign manager trying to get them to work on even something as simple as a common statement on education, which you would think would be a no-brainer for Democrats.
Right.
And we couldn't even get a common statement that lasted for more than 6 hours. We had a press conference on this, and the only thing good I can say is that nobody came. The reason nobody came, to give you an idea of how the news cycle was working, somebody reported that there was a bear in the median strip on Route 29, and all the TV cameras go up to check out the bear, and they skip our press conference, which is probably good because they would have seen that Alex and Blake were utterly dysfunctional as a team, and that's what let Rob win.
Rob was saying that there was so much dysfunction that when a sign was in the yard supporting one of the guys, the other person would come in, take the sign out, and put Rob's sign in. How ridiculous is that?
Well, or there were signs for Caravati and Searles, and we made some.
And then they would cut one out.
They would cut one out
Yeah.
and put in Stratton Solitas' name, for example.
Crazy.
And
I mean, that's like dirty politics at such the local level.
Well, it was a reflection of how dysfunctional the party was at that time. And one of the things that I think I tried to do was to stitch the party back together so that by the time...
Well, it looks like you did a good job.
Yeah, by the time in 2004 I left and went on to do other things with my life, we had a coherent party again.
It's 47. We have 3 minutes left. I always close with the question, is Charlottesville, Virginia a better place today than when you first arrived? I'm going to give you that question in a second. Before I do, I want to throw this question to you. Democratic Party in Charlottesville. We have an election coming up with 3 open councilor positions. Put in perspective how important this election is for Charlottesville's future.
Well, the main thing that I think we need to do is to get back to a point where council works together. What I've seen and I can't go to city council meetings because I'm in the Oratorio Society. We rehearse every Monday night. So it's been 15, 18 years since I've paid much attention, but I watch them online.
Me
Talk
too.
about a masochist.
Yeah.
And,
I do too.
And what I see is folks who don't get along together, who really at some level, many of them don't like each other.
Well, I think there's no trust.
There's no
I
trust.
mean, and there's been backstabbing. There's been leaks. There's been emails sent. It's been reported to the newspaper. Sources leaking stuff. We know it's council doing it.
Right.
It's so shady.
And that's not sort of cataclysmic forces. It's simply get some better people. And
Seriously.
and I think if we get the right people in council, we can make any structure work. If we get the right people, if we get the right people, they can be part-time. If they hire the right city manager, they'll be fine. They just have to get together, hire the right city manager, and let that right city manager do his or her job.
Very well said. Lloyd Snook, last question here. It's 12:48, sir. We got 2 minutes left with Lloyd. When did you first arrive in Charlottesville?
Well, 1961.
Okay, so he's been in Charlottesville since 1961 till now.
Age 8.
That's a pretty solid time there.
Yeah.
Charlottesville, Virginia, last question. A better place in 2018 than it was in 1961?
In a lot of ways, yes. We've got some problems, but the problems, I think, are much less, they're much less fundamental than the problems in 1961, where we had issues in integration, things like that. We've made a lot of progress.
Lloyd Snook killed it today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Can we invite you back on?
Sure.
He's very, very good. Thank you, Lloyd, for joining us on the program, the I Love CVille show, thanks to Greenberry's Coffee. We'll close like we always do. Charlottesville, please be good to each other. Enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Crushed it.
Thank you.
So solid.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, what we're going to do is it's going to stay online, then we'll put it on the website. I'll send you the link so you can see it. Cool. Thank you. Did you have fun?
Yeah. I'd save myself an Altoid here just in case.
Yeah.